Welcome to the IIRSM West Midlands branch webinar. We're looking to the end of what will have been a busy day for many people. We're hoping that we can end it on a high with Stephen, so not too much pressure, Steve.
Thank you.
Yeah, IIRSM West Midlands and many other branches across the organisation aim to provide members with opportunities for recording of CPD through these events and obviously many others that take place. Please view the IIRSM website for information on upcoming webinars. Prior to this event, can I please draw your attention to the Risk Excellence Awards 2023, where it's finally time to get together and celebrate. This is taking place on the 18th of May through IIRSM. These awards celebrate risk excellence and all those that contribute to protecting people, reputations and profits. The awards recognise organisations, teams and individuals that champion risk management. Please view the various award categories that are on the IIRSM website. You can enter for an award or nominate a person, team or organisation. Entries need to be completed before 4 p.m. on the 3rd of February to be eligible. And for those not based in the UK, there will be an opportunity to join the event virtually. IIRSM are also carrying out a survey to members and other stakeholders to gauge how your organisations approach risk management. They value, obviously, and the value that risk and safety management knowledge and skills deliver. Your views and feedback provided during this survey are obviously invaluable. These will help to raise awareness of the profession and education of risk management, such as managing risk, the essentials and more. This survey is closing tomorrow though, so I will ask that you try and do that without delay by providing your response, again, because your feedback really does help. Are you a member that's looking to apply for IIRSM fellowship now or in the future? If so, then join Donna Gordon, who's the training coordinator, and Hugh Maxwell, head of IIRSM fellowship panel, on the 29th of November for a lunchtime webinar between 1 and 2, as they will guide you through the application process and the documentation required for an application to be successful. At the moment, the IIRSM West Midlands branch don't have a webinar scheduled for December, but the branch would ask that you keep an eye on the branch LinkedIn page. So please follow us along with the IIRSM website for obviously events that are taking place. There's other informative posts that we often put out via LinkedIn as well, that will obviously help to keep you up to date and provide opportunities to reflect. Again, for this evening's webinar on business resilience and crisis management, we have Steve Harris, who is Global Head of HSES for Visus Group. If you've not heard Steve speak before, then you haven't watched enough webinars. Only kidding, Steve. Steve has got a couple of webinars that have taken place. They're available on the IIRSM YouTube channel, and you can obviously catch up with them at your own convenience. Steve's a fellow of IIRSM and chartered member of IOSH and speaks very knowledgeably on business resilience and crisis management, as this has been part of his entire career, and I'm sure Steve will tell you much more about this as we go through the event. Finally, thank you again to our Networks Manager, Julie, for assisting with the event. That will include questions at the end. Please use the questions tab and ask Steve any questions that you may have. Thank you as well, Steve, for presenting, as we're extremely grateful for you sparing the time. Over to you, Steve.
Fantastic, thank you, Tony, and thank you on a number of levels. Specifically, thank you for inviting me along today. It's an honour to speak at the branch's webinar, and also my thanks to Julie, who, for those of you not in the know, she's the cement in the wall. She's the one that makes everything happen in the background. So thank you so much, Julie. As Tony said, resilience has been a part of my career since I left university. Too many years ago now than I'd I'd like to admit. And my goal for today is to add some value. So if you'd like to contact me at the end about virtual coffees, about sitting down and going through the processes that I'm talking about me giving you real world examples of what I'm talking about, then be under no illusion. There is no commercial incentive from me. That's not what this is about for me. This is about adding value and sharing lessons with my IIRSM cohort. So before we get into this, I would like to start with a safety moment. And it's quite a poignant safety moment, actually. So it'll only be 5 or 10 minutes, but it's worth it. Well, I think it's worth it. Hopefully you agree. So I knew someone who caught a throat infection in the summer of 2021. And when that illness subsided, the person was actually left with a hoarse voice. Now, a month or so later, their voice was still anything but normal. So they received a loving nudge, should we say, from their partner. And they booked a telephone appointment with the doctor. Now, at the end of that initial appointment, the doctor concluded that there was actually no need to worry. And due to the fact that they knew the origin of the condition, being the illness, the doctor was confident that it would just resolve itself naturally. And the doctor advised the person to make another appointment in 3 or so weeks if the voice still wasn't back to normal. So 3 weeks later, lo and behold, otherwise this would be a very boring safety moment, the hoarse voice was still there. So the person telephoned the doctor's surgery again and shortly was on the phone to the doctor, and the doctor actually repeated his questions and then repeated his previous advice, but added that if the voice didn't clear in another 3 weeks, then an in-person appointment would be more appropriate. So another 3 weeks passed. The voice still wasn't right. So the person made a physical appointment. And a couple of weeks after that, they found themselves in the doctor's waiting room with a very normal expectation of leaving a short time later with a very ordinary, boring prescription. But as the appointment progressed, the doctor became visibly concerned. And he finished his examination, steadied himself, and actually said to the person that they were exhibiting symptoms of lung cancer. Now, the doctor explained that time was now a key factor and that they needed to run some further tests so that they could get a diagnosis one way or the other. So as you can imagine, the person was floored by this. So whilst the person was there, the doctor booked an emergency chest x-ray and an appointment with an ear, nose and throat consultant. And there was an unavoidable 4-week wait at that point. We were slap bang in a pandemic. And the person asked the doctor, how do I access information about this in the interim? And the doctor said, either give the surgery a call and I will always answer, which I thought was exceptional for a doctor when I heard that, or go to the NHS website. So the person left the surgery, went out to their car, logged onto the NHS website, and literally felt a knot in their stomach turn when they read that only 1 in 3 people survive for more than a year after the diagnosis. And now they understood why the doctor had emphasized testing was a priority. So the person used the 4 weeks until the chest x-ray and the consultant's appointment to ensure that their critical illness was all in place, their insurance was all in place. They met with their solicitor, they met with the human resources at work and made sure that they were 100% informed on what would happen if the worst was to happen. And they took a huge amount of comfort knowing that the loved ones that they might leave behind would be financially secure if the worst outcome was to become a reality. Now, the day of the X-ray arrived, and the entire process was completely and utterly underwhelming and done in 15 minutes. The NHS in this country are just amazing. So the person was in and out, and that was it. And a week later, the appointment with the consultant arrived, and having mentally prepared for their worst fears, the journey to the hospital was a strangely calm affair. It would appear that if your enemy's bullets and bombs, you get excited, but when it's a disease, everything's quite matter of fact. And once in the hospital and in the oncology waiting room, the person looked round and realized that they were in the company of others who had already received their bad news and were in treatment. And the person openly admits that their heart broke for them. And of course, the families that they leave behind. So before too long, our hero, should we say, in this story, his name was called, and he was called into the room, and the consultant shook his hand, and the consultant was being a consultant, very confident and very extroverted, and the focus of our story shut him straight down and said, "Do I have cancer?" And the consultant said in a very serious tone that there was no evidence in the x-rays and that it was in fact acid reflux had hit his voice box. Now the person looked round, and the nurse was actually shedding a tear and dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief. And she saw him look at him and said, "I never get to give good news, and it always overwhelms me when I do." Now, I'm sure most of you on this call, how many have we got? 17. I would like to think that most of you on this call have worked out that the person in that story was me. And the relief that I felt at that time was absolutely overwhelming. And I tell that story for a couple of reasons. First of all, because I always like to highlight how fantastic this country's NHS is and what an incredible job they do in the most dire of circumstances at times. But it also sends a message about resilience, about being caught unaware, about when the initial proposed diagnosis, which was more of a working hypothesis until the tests were done, was given, that the person had to go and see HR. I had to go and see my solicitor. I had to go and see critical illness cover. I had to go and I suddenly realized, for somebody that spent their entire life building resilience for organizations, and resilience isn't about the prevention of disruption. Resilience is about minimizing disruption. Obviously, the hierarchy of control says that if we can eliminate it, let's go for that. But we live in a world where we try and manage risk to a LARP. That means as low as reasonably practicable. So we accept the fact that risk is part of every job we do. So resilience is about minimizing that disruption. And so perhaps the content of this webinar might not be so interesting, and it might be quite forgettable, but I hope the safety moment wasn't. And I hope that sticks with you as a reminder every now and again that personal resilience is a thing, professional resilience is a thing, and as part of the world that we live in today, it is more important than ever to be prepared to minimize the disruption that could hit us. And that segue takes us hopefully quite neatly into my first slide, which talks about the global threat landscape and what does it look and what does it feel like. And you'll see by some of the pictures that I put at the bottom there, we've got a cost of living crisis, we've got activism, we've got horrible humanitarian disasters because of geopolitical conflict in Ukraine. And we've got that bubbling up in other areas of the world just now as well. We've got a climate crisis, and we've got a pandemic as well that's got strangely quiet recently. So when we manage risk and we manage severity, we manage consequence and all the rest of it, it's very hard to quantify that. And eventually we get down to, in most instances anyway, we get down to a subjective judgment. And a lot of the time as well, that's down to gut. Hopefully not down to us being informed by mis and disinformation on social media, which is very common, unfortunately. So as you can see at the top right, how do you feel about the outlook for the world? Well, we've got 23% of people, we've got a quarter of people are worried. We've got 61% of people, 2/3 of people are concerned. We've got 12 people that are positive, 12%, and we've got 3.7% who are the optimists. They think it's all going great. But what I take from that is that a quarter of the people, 23% of the people are actively worried about what's happening just now. And what are they actively worried about? Well, if we look on the left-hand side, climate action failure, extreme weather, biodiversity loss, which all intricately leads to other factors in the bigger picture. So you can see that on the right-hand side of this infographic. And there is a lot of color and there's a lot of shooting around in this slide. And I've done that on purpose because I wanted to, first of all, convey the fact that, you know, any fool can make anything more complicated, but it takes a genius to make it simpler. Well, it really takes a genius to make risk simple because it's not a simple concept. And there are lots of moving parts in it. And I also wanted to highlight how important a timeline is for what we're going to talk about. So on the left-hand side of that slide, you can see the timelines that are predicted for these different events. So what do we believe are the top 5 imminent global risks? Well, we've already touched on a couple of them. Rivalry is arguably the biggest in the next decade. And that's going to be geoeconomic confrontations. These are going to emerge as a critical threat to the world in the medium to long term. And I really hope that the information is wrong here. And certainly going to be one of the most severe risks over the next decade. Whilst pressing domestic challenges require immediate attention, the pandemic and its economic consequences have proven that global risks simply do not respect political frontiers, and humanity faces the shared and compounding threats of economic fragmentation, planet degradation, and what we need is a coordinated response. But as a species, what we struggle with is collaboration on anything. COVID-19, and that's not just the virus, but the symptoms, if you will, from the virus, beyond the biological. So we've social cohesion and erosion, livelihood crisis, mental health deterioration. These are all risks that have been spawned by the crisis. And these 3 risks alone and the pandemics itself, probably the most imminent threats to the world right now with the geoeconomic and geopolitical confrontations taking over in the medium to long term. The debt crisis is coming, is here, is whatever you want to call it, the run that we're making from stagflation. But it's an imminent threat to the world for the next 2 years as a minimum. You'll hear an awful lot of the economic forecasters say that the recession, certainly the UK-based recession, is going to be with us until around mid-2024. I'm an economics graduate. I agree with that, but I also am informed enough to know that that's not necessarily a pessimistic view. The planet, extreme weather, climate action failure, the next generation, the differing views and perspectives that each of us has on this, again, eroding that social cohesion that we talked about earlier, and connectivity, something that would never have been part of this presentation, probably even 10 years ago, maybe even 5 years ago, but the digital inequality is an imminent threat. Some countries and industries were able to quickly access and seamlessly adapt to new forms of human interaction and remote work, and some are still on the starting blocks. And of course, cybersecurity will continue to test the world's digital systems over the next 2 years, and to a lesser extent, the 3 to 5 years. That's an industry that's grown 130-fold in the last 15 years. So before we start getting down to the, how do we, as a group, how do we actually, address this within our organizations, let's talk about the 5 lessons that we've taken from historical insights that we can put into practice. This is taken from the commercial world, it's taken from the military world as well. It's a bit of a harmonization between the two, but ground analysis and delivery requirements is key. So what we're going to do is we're going to start with a type of failure, damage, and attrition that could compromise core business goals, and then we're going to work back. And we're going to do that later on in this webinar, so I can make that come alive for you, and I can also show you some of the tools that I use on a day-to-day basis to see if my methodology or my techniques resonate with you and you want to take them further. And as I said at the beginning, it'd be a pleasure to meet with you offline and talk you through that. We need to appreciate the vulnerabilities within the broader ecosystem as well as their vulnerabilities, but the vulnerabilities of the vulnerabilities and the vulnerabilities of the vulnerabilities of the vulnerabilities. Where the nebulous line between known unknowns and unknown unknowns is, and the delicate ecosystem of interdependence in that. It's quite literally a stack of cards. But it's great fun when you're safe and warm and you're discussing it with your senior leadership team and you're able to take a break, use a bathroom and fill a coffee cup. It's great fun at that point. It's not so great fun when you're in the middle of it. Different type of fun. Number 3 is embrace a diversity of resilience strategies, and that's resilience within your resilience. So some crises can be mitigated by placing emphasis on just-in-case reliability rather than just-in-time efficiency, and others are served by implementing backups and redundancies, processes, ensuring the organization can adapt. Supportive employee behaviors are vital. But I guess when you remove all the noise from that, and what we're going to hear from our senior leadership teams is resilience. You want me to diversify the strategies of resilience. That sounds expensive. And they'd be right. But is there a risk-based return on that investment? Yes, there is. And could it potentially lead to competitive advantage? Certainly. And considering the risk profile of the world that we're living in, which, let's be honest, is deteriorating, the likelihood that you're going to need that, he says, coming off the back of a pandemic, is greater and greater by the day. What's really essential is to connect the resilience efforts with other goals as well. ESG is a fantastic platform for us. Anybody that's not looked into ESG so far, I would advise you to, particularly if you wanted to start with something like the United Nations Global Compact and work backwards. The UN are I wouldn't say they're leading the way in this, but I would say they're very close to it. So the example that I've given here is shortening supply chains can advance net zero strategies and reduce exposure to adverse developments. So reducing supply chains, you are going to have less carbon, and it's going to take you towards net zero. Also, strong community relations may help recover initiatives in the event of a disaster. Certainly, I work in the energy industry, so I'm very much offshore, focused, but so I get to spoil myself with fantastic relationships with local emergency response and hospital assessments, that type of thing. But no matter what industry you're in, it's always good to get those relationships on the go with your register of interested parties, which if you're ISO certified, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. And if you're not ISO certified and you're wondering what I'm talking about with interested parties, I'm basically talking about anybody who your decisions can affect or anybody whose decisions can affect you would be classified as an interested party. So, and they all have a place to play in resilience. And number 5 is an ethos. And it's to consider resilience as a journey, not a destination. It's like heading towards perfection. It's wonderful to shoot for it, but anyone at all that tells me that they're perfect, I imagine that we'd all think the same if we met someone and they said, you know what, I'm perfect. Except for my partner, of course, who's absolutely perfect. But leading resilience programs learn from stress testing and actual crises to emerge stronger. And they're alert to changing circumstances that may demonstrate elevated risks, vigilant and challenging themselves about blind spots, shortcomings, etc. So what does this look like in our organizations? Well, I'm always amazed how many clients that I start working with and I say, as an opening gambit, let's talk about your risk register. And I'm either not showing a risk register or I'm showing a risk register of varying degrees of thoroughness. Now, when I say varying degrees of thoroughness, I would describe a risk register as being fit for purpose if it's commensurate with the risk of the organization. So if the organization is very light on risk, then you don't need a massive risk register. It's all about that as low as reasonably practicable goal. And I would say exactly the same in terms of your risk register. I like to base my risk register, my organizational risk register anyway. Obviously, the risk register, when it starts to talk about my individuals, then I need to look at job influencing factors and the job roles that they do. But when I'm looking at an organizational risk register, I use PESTLE, which is political, economic, social, technological, legal, and environmental. And there are other aspects to PESTLE. You can add some on, you can take some away, and do all the rest of it. But I tend to stick to PESTLE, and it works very well for me. And with each of the entries from the PESTLE, when it goes into my risk register, what I tend to do as well, and it has given a massive amount of dividends to me in the past, is I run a small SWOT analysis on it as well. And not only does that usually bring out more within that section, so for example, if we talk about technological, which is just getting bigger and bigger and bigger every time I do it, if I go to innovation and then I run a SWOT on the innovation in the organization that I'm looking at the time, usually I get not only horizontally more understanding of the innovation of that organization, so I'm able to categorize risk better with them, but I'll usually get actually another entry of innovation, and then I'll maybe put in AI or analytics, data examination, that type of thing. So I would implore to everybody on the call, do not underestimate the power of a risk register. So once we've got our risk register, and once we understand a threat landscape as much as we can understand the threat landscape, because we work on data, we stay informed, but we don't have a crystal ball. We need to start bringing in business continuity management techniques. So this is all about identifying the parts of your organization that you really cannot afford to lose. And that can be information, stock, premises, staff, and then putting the plans in place on how to maintain these if a disruptive event occurs. And that event can be anything at all, from natural, earthquakes, accidental fires, or deliberate fires. Arson is a horribly frequent occurrence. And it can cause major disruption to your organization. But if you plan now rather than waiting for it to happen, as I said earlier on, if you're planning whilst you can have that cup of coffee in the warm, calm room, then it's much easier to be able to get back to business quicker than your competitors. So what you really need to start asking yourself, and we're going to start getting into some pretty interesting stuff right now, but 4 questions to have a think about in the back of your mind just now would be, in terms of your business or the clients that you talk to, what are the key products and services? They're really core activities. And what are the critical activities and resources that are required to deliver those key products and services? Then what are the risks to them? And how do you maintain them in the event of a disruption event? And hopefully we're going to answer all 4 of these questions quite soon. So I would like to think everybody on the call is very familiar with the Deming cycle, the plan, do, check, act. What we're going to do today is we're going to talk through the plan. So as you can see, needs of interested parties, we've talked about that already. We're going to talk about maintaining and improving business continuity management. But first of all, we need to actually establish it. And I'm going to take you through a couple of really interesting methodologies. And the first one is a business impact analysis. And I've got tons and tons of examples of these I've done in the past. So like I say, if you want to talk about it, give me a call. Business impact analysis identifies and documents your key products and services, the critical activities required to deliver them, and the impact that a disruption of these events would have in your organization, and also the resources required to resume activities. So what's the first step? And I want to also say at this point that I've been in a lot of business impact analysis, and in the early days, other people led them. I tend to lead them these days. The worst ones I've ever been into have been ones where alpha personality stands at the front and dominates conversation, and people switch off and don't contribute, because the most valuable contribution in that room could very well be the shy, introverted engineer that's sitting in the corner. So your job as the facilitator is to create a completely psychologically safe environment and really, really try your best to bring people out of their shell. So you list the key products and services of the organization provides, and which, if disrupted, will have the greatest impact. And then you lay it over a timeline. So you give yourself 24 hours, 24 to 48 hours, up to 1 week, depending on what industry you're in, up to 2 weeks, up to a month, up to 6 months, up to a year. But what you can now do in step 2 is you can identify the length of time that you can manage a disruption to each of the key products and services without threatening the viability of your business. So if you almost think about a RACI chart or a Gantt chart, you know, with that kind of wavy line, and you know where your danger area is in terms of time. So in step 3, you set the point in time at which each of your key products and services has to be resumed in the event of a disruption. And then you have a look at the critical activities that are required to bring them back. And then step 5, you list what you need. So you list your people, your premises, your process, your technology, your information, your supplies, whatever those critical ingredients are in this bake of your products and services. That's what you've got. So we've looked at the key products and services, we've put them on a timeline, we've identified how long we can manage the disruption on each of those products and services without threatening our viability. We've set the point in time that we need them to return. We've documented the critical activities that are required to make them return, and then we know the resources that are needed to make them return. So what does that actually look like? Because I've got 21 people on the call, and I imagine 21 people are all imagining different things. We'll get to that in a little while, but here's a little aid memoir, which is pretty interesting. It's some of the common questions that I ask. So, what's the optimum number of staff that you require to carry out your critical activities? And usually, when I ask that to a room, and I try not to put too many people in the room, because if you put 20 people in a room, you're going to be there for a long time. So I try and find a quorum which is respectful to the generality of the organization, but also is efficient. So what's the minimum staffing level with which you can provide some sort of service, and what skills, level of expertise is required to undertake these activities? And you can see with these questions, and hopefully you're imagining in your own organization, who would I actually need in the room at this point? Because what you'll have done, if you're like any other organization in the world, is you'll have promoted an awful lot of your specialists to be generalists in management. And the generalist will think they have an idea of what needs to happen to return the business, but they won't. So it might actually not be a head of department that you need here, although you'll probably have to pay them the respect of inviting them to the room, but it might be the assistant manager, it might be the workshop foreman, it might be a machine operator. Now comes the really interesting part. So we've done the business impact assessment, and we've got that sheet beside us. So in the context of business continuity management, we then need to risk assess. So the risk assessment looks at the likelihood and impact of a variety of risks that could cause a business interruption. And by assessing these, we'll be able to prioritize your risk reduction activities. So we've talked about the risk of losing, different things. So if we go back, the key products and services, and if we lose the widget that we make, how long can we do that for? But then we come through to the risk assessment, and we branch off the BIA, and we say, well, actually, let's start talking about quantification. Let's talk about the risks from the loss of staff, systems, utilities, premises, because it is only by quantification that we are going to be able to approach the senior leadership team or the board and get them to release the resources we need to put the stuff into action. So what's the risk? So let's, step 2, list the likelihood, then list what we currently have in place to prevent and reduce the likelihood. So, you might need to grab in your risk register on that again, and list what arrangements would prevent and reduce the likelihood, and then assign the likelihood score to each risk. And then comes the really clever bit. Well, I think it's clever, but I'm easily pleased in certain aspects. Using the risk matrix, you plot the likelihood identified in step 5 against the impact that was previously identified in the business impact assessment. So using the risk matrix, you get the likelihood identified in step 5. So they assign a likelihood score to each risk. And then you put that against the impact as previously identified in the business impact assessment, and then you lay it on that Eisenhower-esque matrix. And obviously, if you're talking quadrant A, you've got something to deal with. If you're talking about quadrant D, then you've got something to address, but you can address it in a completely different way. And then step 7 is the part where we should all be turning around and smiling at each other and, you know, getting that warm feeling that we've actually produced something during this meeting, and give ourselves a pat in the back before talking about, do we treat, tolerate, transfer, or terminate the risk? And this in itself is an interesting one, and this in itself is where you actually turn away from the psychologically safe room and you start shortening decision lines and bringing in the likes of your CEO or your MD, because they're the people that are really going to have to make that choice with input from the room on, do we treat, tolerate, transfer, or terminate? Because there are some big business-wide implications there. So this page, so what do you do, Steve? Well, in this page, I've put down a couple of the formats that I use. So the long green Excel sheet at the bottom of the screen there, it's one of the business impact assessment templates that I use. Top left, that's one of the flows that I created for a client, and you'll see the timeline down on the right hand side. And I like timelines. You have to stay as agile as you possibly can during the unexpected, although how unexpected is, you know, how expected is unexpected. And it's nice just to have something there, because when the bells go off and when the whistles go and when everything's going wrong, you'd be amazed how comforting it is just to have something to follow that you've drilled and you've practiced on and you can fall back into. And then on the right hand side, it's quite prescriptive, and that is that's not a during the event, that is an after the event checklist. That have we actually done everything that we need to do, because we don't have time usually when things are going interesting and things are going noisy to turn around and follow procedures left, right, and center. So what are the common pitfalls? Well, the practical challenge is that it's needed infrequently. Particularly, I'll take it back to the energy industry, I'll take it back to aviation, maritime, any high hazard industry. Because you don't see big events all the time, it's hard to prepare for them. Because you see cut fingers and black nails, then you'll get clearance for a budget for them. The consequence and severity are close to nothing. It's Darwinian. But when we're talking about real big, low frequency, high value events, it's difficult to get buy-in. So it's a common pitfall that we need to keep them testing, and we need to keep drills. We need to retain the capabilities to support BCM, because when our more business related colleagues decide to trim the organization during a pandemic, what they might not look at is the importance of the people that they're playing beyond their formal employment contract job role. They might not realize that they're actually stripping away resilience. And we need to continually review processes and our rationale for relevance. We need to make sure that our culture is matching it, and we need to make sure that our processes are up to date. The world is changing so quickly that now a management system is a living, breathing animal, needs to change with it. And so that falls on us. But the steps to success are always people first. It's always the PAIR principle. People, environment, asset, reputation. It's always people first. You'll do a great job if you understand the business and you understand your interested parties and stakeholders. And you need to integrate BCM into your strategy. Number 5 there, a balance between training and practice. I get invited along by clients that say, come along and run drills with my team and grade them. And I won't run drills for the team. What I'll do is I'll sit down and interview the team, because what is the point in running a drill on a team that needs to be trained in order to drill? I'm not going to run a drill on a team that's just going to embarrass them. So have a look at whether your team needs to be trained or whether they're at the stage where they can practice. And also be informed and be realistic. And over and above this, have fun with it as well. I've been involved in drills where we've had makeup artists and smoke grenades, and people have gone off and printed off imaginative front pages to newspapers that are totally fictional, that play into the scenario. You're going to retain more information from your team. You're going to get better quality of outcome if they're present and they feel like they can contribute. Even if their contribution is absolute rubbish 99 times out of 100, you never know what the silent hand is doing because of that contribution. It could well be encouraging the other person in the room that doesn't usually contribute, that you really need to contribute to start talking. So, yeah. But most importantly, let the rhetoric match the action. Say what you do and do what you say. And yeah, be able to build a lot of respect out of putting this in place as well. So what's resilience? It's an ability to cover from or adjust easily to misfortune or change. We've got a heck of a world to live in. We've got increasing risk profiles. We've got known unknowns and unknown unknowns. We love to say that things are unprecedented and we never imagined it would happen, such as pandemics. I know it's confirmation bias, but if we all had an intelligent conversation just now and looked back, all the indicators were there that it would happen. So why did it catch us by surprise? Because we let it. So yeah, I'll finish as I started. My slides are not incredibly exciting, but hopefully they've hit a couple of spots with you. But over and above that, I hope you remember the safety moment. Just stay prepared, stay frosty, and you'll get back what you put into business continuity management. So, Tony, I'll hand over to you, and if there are any questions, I would love to take them. My LinkedIn profile's there. Just drop me a message or drop me an email or whatever you want to do if the subjects interest you. And I look forward to the virtual coffee. So I'll always say yes. It might be a week or a couple of weeks down the line, but I'll always say yes.
Thank you, Steve, for another great presentation, and thank you for giving up your valuable time to speak to the branch tonight. Surprisingly, we don't have any questions, but I think your presentation is so comprehensive that you probably covered anything. So unless anybody has any questions, do you have a top tip to leave us with?
Yeah, so I'd love to be able to tell you that it's a really easy topic, but It's a very subjective one. You've got to stay true to your cause. You've got to constantly remind yourself why you're doing this, because the status quo stalwarts, the ones that can't see into the future, the ones that do get caught by surprise, will rubbish you. So stay strong, manage your stakeholders, and it's an incredible win. So when something disruptive happens to one of my clients, I wish with all my heart that nothing disruptive ever happens to them again. But when it does happen and I get a message the next day saying, I was close to phoning you at 3 o'clock last night, Steve, but I realized the systems that you put in place. No, that's not right. But I realized the systems that you showed us how to put in place, they all worked, and it was a brilliant outcome. Thanks so much. The satisfaction that you will get from that, even if it's just 10% of the satisfaction that I get from it, it is absolutely career defining. So yeah, stay positive.
Fantastic. Thank you, Steve. Tony, can I
Steve,
hand over
yeah.
to you for closing comments?
Yes, thank you, Julie. Steve, I'll say thank you very much for obviously a great presentation. Firstly, can I also say that I'm sure that I speak for all of us when I say that we're obviously chuffed to a degree, I suppose, for the result that you actually got, and hope that what the acid reflux doesn't cause too much discomfort for you.
I'll take that every day of the week, considering the alternative. It's a very good, humbling, constant reminder of just how grateful I need to be for every single day. So yeah, it was an interesting journey, but I appreciate you saying that, Tony. Thank you.
No, most definitely. Steve, from my perspective, what I would like to say is that I'm sure I'm going to sort of preempt the answer anyway, but I found that the COVID pandemic has obviously been a massive wake-up call to many businesses on the fact that they need to have business resilience and crisis management in place just to help them through that process. How do you find that that has come down, let's say, or affected other businesses that you've dealt with?
Oh, it's been a complete and utter shake and wake up call for everyone. I don't tout for business. I work by word of mouth, which appears to work okay for me. And in the old days, well, when I say the old days, but it was the old days, because before COVID, even though it was only 2019, it was only 3 years ago. It feels like a lifetime ago. When I'd walk into a business and say, I tell you what we're going to do is we're going to do a bit of, it's an oil company. We're going to do some penetration testing for potential activists because you've been getting a little bit of traffic on your website. A couple of your people have been approached, and something might be on the, and generally it would be come on, really, whereas post COVID, I could walk into most rooms and say, I tell you what we're going to do, we're going to prepare for an alien invasion. And everyone will turn around and say, you know what, I'm totally up for that. How do we deal with it? It's totally focused people on the forward and on being agile and on being prepared. It was a horrible, horrible thing, the pandemic. It was dreadful. The loss of life was absolutely disgustingly tragic, but there have been silver linings to it.
Yeah, agreed. From my perspective as well, I found that I don't know if it's the same for yourself, that business resilience and crisis management can quite often be driven through insurance providers, because they want to know that their, let's say, commodity, the people that they're insuring, are going to put enough steps in place that obviously mitigates or reduces any claim that they're going to have against any insurers for loss of earnings or whatever the case may be.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I see that an awful lot, and subsequently independent assurance on resilience frameworks is now big business. Yeah, I was going to say something really quite prolific there, and then my 6-month-old Fox Red Lab just walked into the room and licked my hand, and I've got a huge smile on my face, and whatever I was going to say has left me, so I do apologise. Another time.
Finally, yes, yeah. Finally, Steve, I will say to you that as a business, or that our parent company, for instance, or my parent company, we have got what we obviously refer to as a disaster recovery plan, which a lot of what you've mentioned tonight is covered within that plan. So I must admit that, for instance, there are a number of areas, like you said, what do you do in the first 2 or 4 hours, what do you do in the first 24 hours, what do you do in the next 48 hours, and so on. And we've obviously relied on that quite considerably, partly for the pandemic and partly for other factors as well that we've also seen that have sort of risen the head, let's say. But I'm obviously just going to finally say as well that really people, for obvious reasons, like you've said in your presentation, they need to reflect on their continuity plans, let's say their business resilience, to basically, well, like us, we've made amendments to it, what we're going to do, how we're going to do things, just because of, let's say, the things that have hit our business as an example. And I'm not just talking about COVID. So I think it's very important, like you say, to reflect, to update, stay on top of your plan, and make sure that is all in place. Who needs to do what times, frames, etc.
100%. And what I was going to say before Maggie came in and gave me the most fantastic interruption there was, I work sometimes with a group called Restrata, and Restrata are a group of crisis management specialists. So they tend to be security services, army, emergency services, those types of people. And one of the constant conversations we have is the difference between a business manager and a crisis manager. And I did a bit of writing about it. I published in the Sentinel about it. There's an article in the Sentinel. I think it was Q2 this year. David published it for me. I would ask you to go back, anyone that's interested, go back into the IIRSM website and have a look at that Sentinel article, and if you would do me the honor and pleasure of reflecting on some of the philosophies that I suggest in it, because I've seen so many fantastically enthusiastic people, and all they needed, and it's a very, very poor metaphor, but it's like playing golf. You know, you go out on the course and you're smacking a ball around, but gosh, you're having good fun and you're determined to get better. You only need one lesson with a local professional, and all of a sudden your learning is exponential. So if you've got that down, your business continuity management, your disaster recovery and all that, and it's going brilliantly, then fantastic. But maybe invite in, if anyone's got any contacts in the local police or fire brigade or whatever, invite them in, buy them a nice lunch and say, you know what, hang around for an hour and watch this and give us some feedback. And it might just be gold. But yeah, if you could read my article in the Sentinel and just have a think about it, that would you'd make me sleep better at night.
Steve, we'll do our best to obviously put that out on our LinkedIn page, so I'll post that out. On a final note, I'll say thank you again on behalf of IIRSM West Midlands for sparing the time this evening. I know that it obviously hasn't necessarily been easier for you, because I know for our conversation prior to the event that you're in a little bit of pain, so fingers crossed that eases sometime soon. But thank you very much for your time, Steve. It's really appreciated. And thank you again, Julie, for assisting with the event.
You're welcome. Thank you, Steve, and thank you, Tony. I'd like to wish everyone a good evening and just quickly remind you that the webinar will be uploaded onto the IIRSM YouTube channel probably next week now, and your attendance certificates will come out this time tomorrow. So I'd like to wish everyone a good evening. Good evening, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.